Welcome. I'm saying welcome back. Does that make sense? Yes. Welcome back to our Real Talk listeners for episode 23. We're going to be talking about Suicide Prevention Month.
Yes,
Um,
we are.
so you're with just Jesse and me today, the dream team. And this is going to be our first episode we post in September. And September is National Suicide Prevention Awareness Month. And we are really excited, not only because, of course, at our agency Via Link, that is one of our main missions is suicide prevention, intervention, postvention, education, doing what we can to spread awareness and destigmatize mental health and suicide. And then, of course, if you've listened to Jesse and I, y'all know that this is a topic especially important to both of us. And yeah, so we're just going to talk about what's up this month and what Suicide Prevention Month means to us. I want to start us off with kind of a question, not a question, discussion topic, maybe, Jesse, if that's okay.
That's fine.
Um, and I was thinking about on my drive here because I was reading some studies about, like suicide awareness and what that does in communities. Like, does it actually have an effect on suicide rates? And it was really interesting because what they were finding is that it's not just awareness, it's the type of awareness that really you see where there is an effect on lowering suicide rates. So it was kind of like when we're thinking about like suicide prevention month, of course, it's important to have the like showering of awareness that we do as
Right.
wonderfully as I mean, I think is getting so much more attention nationally with the
Yeah.
ribbons and the signs and the semicolons and the 98 banners and everything like that. But it was saying that like in your more internal community, whether that's your school, neighborhood, place you work, church, whatever it is, that to see a significant lowering of suicide rates, it's important to go a step beyond that and like have the real talk and real information about suicide and suicide as a mental health issue, as a health issue, as a disease, if however you would like to frame it, and sort of like go beyond just the ribbons and really like having to talk, especially with like younger communities, like in schools and things like that, of really understanding that this is not like an abstract concept of like really knowing like this is a mental health issue and there is help for it. So let's talk
Right.
about what suicide ideation really is. Let's talk about what it might look like or feel like, and let's talk about how you get help for that.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's really important because I know when I was in school, you knew what suicide was, but there was no, you know, nothing much about it. You just heard about it, someone may have done it and they would offer, like the counselors to talk to you, but you didn't really know, signs and symptoms of it or what it could look like on somebody and you didn't know a whole lot, and I'm just 38. So, I graduated in 2006 and, we had a few people that I went to high school with that committed suicide, but we didn't really know what exactly that was or what it meant or, what the families went through afterwards. There was no really discussion about it. It was almost like, it was kind of forbidden, like, this happened, let's move on type thing.
And that can be such the trouble. Oh gosh, I don't know what my computer's doing. Such the trouble with even thinking about suicide as kind of this like cyclical nature and how when someone has to just kind of move on, when they've gone through a loss, that then that creates this unhealed trauma and grief, which can be so overwhelming that then that leads to suicidal thoughts in the person who is the survivor of the loss. Because it's like, I mean, I've had clients show up for our survivors group who have said similar things where they're like, I can't do this. Like, I cannot live in this much pain because the
Yeah.
grief, the trauma is so much and you're feeling so isolated during it. Um, so yeah, I think having those real discussions and remembering the kind of full circle of what suicide awareness is that, when I think in terms of suicide prevention, we need to be intentional with what that means. And I talk about this a good bit when we're training on suicide response. And it was actually brought up by some interns at an agency in Baton Rouge and got me pondering on the topic. And that they were like, well, we don't really like the term like suicide prevention trainings. They're so generic. There's so many of them. And like, we need to know how to like work with suicide. What do we do? And I was like, that's a really good thought. And it's why we don't usually call our trainings suicide prevention trainings. We
Right.
call them suicide awareness and suicide response trainings because it's like to actually prevent suicide death and suicide attempts, which is what, of
Yeah.
course, we want to do. You have to lean in and create cultures and communities where people can embrace and get support for their thoughts of suicide. Because if we're preventing suicide by preventing the thoughts, like that's not a real thing. That would be like,
Right.
let's prevent panic attacks by ignoring that anxiety exists, you know?
Right.
So it's an interesting concept with suicide prevention for me because to me, I'm like, I think that really means suicide awareness, you know?
Yeah, definitely. Because, and there's always a big debate on like when you should start talking about it. And, like me and my mom was talking about it one day, and, because I have two younger nephews and they're in elementary school. And I was like, they should bring it up, in elementary schools and have, they don't have to put it out there to where it's extreme, but they could put it in a way that they'll understand. I said, because there are fifth graders who have committed suicide, or
Mhm.
have been fourth graders that have committed suicide, and people have tried as young as, 6 or 7. And I said, and sometimes they just hear a little bit, they don't really know what that means, like when they do it, what the outcome really can be. And I said, it needs to be spread everywhere. I said, not just, in schools. I was like churches, like, elderly homes, because there's people that are in elderly homes that get, they don't have anybody and they attempt. So, I was like, like, I know we at V-Link we have the Ag Stress line, which is for farmers, and you would be surprised how many people, when I was on the line and answering those calls, that they just thought they were just feelings because they just felt that way. They didn't really know anything about it. And I mean, these are grown men and grown women, and to be able to educate them, and, to also, just kind of talk to them about it, and, tell they felt better about the situation when we got off the phone is was a blessing. But you just never realize like people's like kind of like where you said, like where people are in different areas of the world, where, in Louisiana, it may be something that's been talked about at schools and things like that. And then you go to Alabama, it may not even been mentioned once or twice, so it's just really crazy, like the different areas that, haven't heard about it or haven't had much awareness. That's why I think, these podcasts and, even TikToks they have, I don't know if you've seen them lately, but it's like the day after you unalive yourself, your dog's gonna be wondering. Like they make these videos of what people are gonna go through, and I think those are so powerful because I don't think people think about it, I mean, and a lot of people, and with TikTok being everywhere, I think it helps bring awareness. So I'm glad we got to do our TikTok mental health map with Lena. That was a positive, and because we want to spread as much awareness as we can. But I do think it's crazy how in some places there's not hardly any, even though they have like high suicide rates.
Yeah, and it can be so different, like, even in Louisiana from school to school. Like, oh, sorry, I just choked on myself. What, type of information that students have access to. I mean, literally, like, neighboring schools. One can have a really great suicide awareness program, and the other one I mean, I've been chased out of a classroom before because they were like, You can talk about suicide to the 7th graders, not to the 6th graders," type of thing, and it's very
Yeah.
odd, and I have done presentations on predominantly mental health, but I put suicide in there for elementary school as 3rd grade, I think has been the youngest, and it's the most intimidating to talk about with the younger kids. I
Yeah.
mean, truly, it's a huge responsibility. And I'm only mainly talking about mental health and like giving vocabulary words essentially, like what's nervousness versus anxiety, what's being sad versus feeling depressed. And then I talk about what is suicide, and we just briefly go over that like that means that you're having thoughts about not wanting to be alive anymore. And we
Yeah.
don't go a whole lot further into it than that, but, you get so many kids will bring up, "Well, my uncle or my friend or our neighbor or whatever." I mean, they're being exposed to this, but we're not giving them the language for if they're experiencing it themselves. And that was I don't remember where it was. Someone was like, well, the third grader didn't know the word suicide before this, so you can plant the idea, which you cannot. And I was like, I
Yeah,
didn't plant the idea. I gave them a vocabulary word for if that
yeah,
ever is occurring for them. That's so important. Um, there's a documentary out of Louisiana called My Ascension. Shout out to Greg DeSherry. He's been a guest on the podcast. Mental health when you work in mental health. If anybody wants to go back and listen to that, but he directed the documentary, and the young woman Emma Benoit, who is the focus of the documentary, from surviving her own suicide attempt. She told me, and it's in the documentary as well, that like she didn't even know she was having thoughts of suicide until she attempted, because
yeah,
it just wasn't what was talked about, not at school, not in her family. And, just because it wasn't the norm. It wasn't because any like hatred or not believing in anything.
right.
It just wasn't ever a topic. And that's why I think that like giving these vocabulary words is super, super important, because the ideation will be there and will take over your brain when it's not addressed. And that's how your brain can get so twisted into thinking people will be better off without you, which is
Hmm.
100% never the case.
Right.
Everybody's death will devastate multiple people. Um, but it's when you don't know. I think it's like we talk so often about, not just you and I, the universal we, about reaching out for help, but someone has to realize that they need help to even be able to
Right.
reach out for help.
Yeah, I definitely agree there. And like I said, it's changed so much since, like each generation is different. And my mom said that when I was little, I was exposed to a family member. Well, I looked at him as a family member, exposed to him. I, went up to him and he hung himself. And I didn't know, what it was. And she said that she didn't really know how to explain it to me besides telling me that, he went to heaven, and things like that. And, she felt like I was too young to understand. And, so like generations that have come up, there has been a little bit more awareness, there's been a little bit more talk. And I feel like, like I told you in high school, I mean, there wasn't much, but I do feel like in certain areas, especially I grew up, in Douglasville, Georgia, and they did a big thing about it a couple years ago, like maybe 2 years ago, just because they were having people have those thoughts, and a couple people did commit suicide. So it was talked about. There was like actual like grieving therapy that you could go to and things like that. So I feel like it's evolving in some places. I feel like a lot of places it might not be like you said, like talked about, or that vocabulary where, some people are like, well, you just have thoughts of like, but you got to explain that. You can't just be like, well, where you don't feel as good. Well, I don't feel that good when I have a cold. It's not the same as,
Right.
as having thoughts of killing myself. So, I mean, sometimes I know that people feel like people are too young or you have to baby the situation, but the reality of it is as big as social media has grown and how different generations are, it's almost like you gotta have a lot more awareness out now than ever because it's everywhere. It's on social media. It's on TVs. It's on even teenage shows that you watch. I mean, I was watching Seventh Heaven and Dawson Creek. They didn't have stuff like that, And then you watch Pretty Little Liars or something like that, and it talks about it. And I mean, I'm grateful that it does. But that means, like, as a nation, we all need to step up and kind of explain 100% what it is. Like you said, the vocabulary is very important. You can't tell someone, oh, well, this is, suicide. You didn't plant the idea in their head. They just didn't have the word for it. And you just gave them the word. It's not like you were like, oh. So,
Yeah, because there is, so when we're talking about, fancy word alert, iatrogenic risk, which is like the concept of that if you talk about a topic, you can actually put someone more at risk. Like eating disorders, there's an iatrogenic risk to that. I'm sure most of our female listeners can relate to that, that when we got all of those eating disorder, presentations when we were in like sixth and seventh grade, all it did was like give us tips for disordered eating.
right.
But that there is no iatrogenic risk when you're discussing suicide as a topic, as a mental health topic. I mean, that's been studied since literally like the 1890s and keeps being proven over and over and over again. There can be risk, however, when we are irresponsible with our depictions of suicide, which is when like the show 13 Reasons Why first came out. And, their whole purpose was that they were trying to shine a light onto these mental health topics, whole other thing about whether that was done effectively or not. But originally in the show they depicted pretty graphically Hannah, the character, attempting
Mhm.
suicide, and then they took that scene off. And some people were like, well, this show is supposed to be real. And it's like those type of realistic suicide depiction scenes, that is dangerous for someone who is really struggling with thoughts of
Mhm.
suicide. That can increase our capability for a suicide attempt when we are getting visuals like this and we are contemplating attempting and our minds are subconsciously preparing to be able to attempt suicide. And so it's just important to know, like, what if you are going to be an advocate, um, and I encourage everybody to. That's wonderful. But it's like,
Yeah.
let's make sure that we are doing our due diligence about what's the information that's helpful and what can be dangerous. Because if I were to go do a suicide awareness presentation for a bunch of students and just like only talk about different ways you could attempt suicide, like, yeah, that could
Right.
be a risk for somebody. However, talking and destigmatizing suicidal thoughts is hugely beneficial because
Right.
that's the way to prevent attempts, is for someone to recognize they're having thoughts of suicide, hopefully when the thoughts are smaller, and be able to know where to go for help then so that they can learn their brain.
Right. Yeah, and I think, I think it's so great that, we actually have a month, with September to celebrate, suicide awareness, and I say celebrate because it's great to have, that knowledge out there and that people are focusing on it, and you'll see things everywhere about it, and I like that because I think it ends up bringing a lot more awareness to people that's helpful. And so, I'm really grateful for the month of September because there's like so many activities. Like I know like on my Facebook, like there's like it says walk, like 25 miles, with us to,
Mhm.
bring awareness to suicide. And I looked up like the cities and like it's almost in every state. And I thought that was really cool, and like I said, there's more, sometimes there's more in certain states versus the others, but I know like Tennessee does like a fishing thing, and Gatlinburg offers like a cookout where they have people who can talk and tell their stories and stuff. So I mean, it's really cool that there's different things in different cities just to help bring awareness to, suicide in general, because I do think it's important that everybody gets that chance, to know, or at least to be able to freely talk about it and not feel judged, or, you know, and then learn where to turn for help. That's what I'm so grateful for 988. I mean, they're everywhere. Like I was telling you, there's documentaries I watch on YouTube. Like at the end, there's always like 988, text 988 or call. And, I see a lot of things that even if they mention having suicide thoughts in a TV show, like at the end, they'll do a disclaimer of 988 or, another number. That they can call, or whoever sponsored that, there's other helplines, but that's why I'm so grateful that 988's really out there, and a lot of awareness about 988's being put out, just because I feel like now there's a lot more people that know about it, and will be like, okay, I heard about 988, let me see what it's about, I'm having these thoughts, let me just try it out. So I'm grateful that 988 awareness has been brought out a lot more than before. You had the talk line, and I mean, I never heard anything about it. Now I've heard a lot about 988, but not so much before that.
Yeah, I mean, with ViaLink, we've answered 988 since before it was 988, when it was 1-800-273-TALK. Prior to that, when it was 1-800-SUICIDE. We have a long history with answering the suicide prevention lifeline, and that is quite, a privilege and honor for us. And I mean, when 988 was launched, and there has been so many more awareness campaigns, I mean, Jesse, the volume has really escalated, which is
Yeah.
great because when we're looking at our data on that, our volume has gone up over 100%
Hmm.
consistently. But the amount of times where we've had to get emergency services involved has stayed the same or even decreased. So
Yeah.
what that shows me is that people are learning about the line before they're in that imminent crisis.
Right.
that they know that they can reach out for help whenever they need to. And I think that's what's so important about 988 as well, is that we can call it 988 and normalize it, that you don't have to quote unquote be in crisis. Because I know that can, for some people, being in crisis might mean that they're like about to, you know, flip their lid, like panic.
Yeah.
That doesn't have to be what crisis looks like. And sometimes when we're calling things like the suicide line, someone might think we're going to jump to an assumption about what that means, when really it's like we don't want any barriers to anybody calling 988. Just a reminder, 988 is available 24 hours a day for free. It is confidential. And you are routed to your local contact center that answers 988 predominantly via geo routing. So it's a local service, even though it's a national number. But
Right.
of course, we can't speak for every state, but here in Louisiana, our 988 is there for anything you are going through. That can be
Mhm.
because you are in the car and you've had an exhausting day and you're overwhelmed and you don't know who to turn to and you think you're going to cry. Call 988. That also includes moments of crisis, moments when you're overwhelmed, moments when you're panicking. We can help you with de escalation. And that also includes thoughts of suicide, wherever that might be on that spectrum of suicide ideation. Thoughts that maybe have started smaller, thoughts like, I don't want to wake up tomorrow, all the way to, I mean, Jesse and I can both say we have taken calls from people who have had the method in their hands, and we can help you. It is never too late. If you are breathing, reach out for help because there is help and you can feel better. And no matter what, you don't have to go through anything alone. That I think is our main message with 988 is that we care and we can't, if we could wave a wand and make everything better, we would,
Right.
but we promise that you don't, there's nothing that you have to go through alone. We're here for
Yeah.
you.
And I think that's the biggest message. One, I think letting them know that they don't have to go alone. And two, the biggest thing that I think really stands out is that we're available 24/7 because sometimes you could be having a good day and then you lay down at night and things just kind of hit you. And you don't want to wake up your friends or you don't want to wake up your parents or you don't want to feel like a burden at waking somebody up at 3 a.m. The fact that you can text 988 even if you can't talk on the phone or you don't feel like talking on the phone, you can text us, you can call us. I feel like us being available 24/7 is a game changer. Like I think it really really helps because some people are lonelier at night, some people are lonelier during the day. You just never know when that hits you. And the fact, like you said, you're not alone, and you're always going to get somebody, and somebody that's not gonna be judgmental or feel like you're a burden or they don't care. We really are here to help. And like I've talked to people and they're like, well, this is just a job. And I'm like, no, this I do this because I want to. Like, yeah, it's a job, but I could be doing anything. And a lot of us can. And I'm like, you don't understand. Like, I'm here because I really want to help you. Like, I'm not just picking up the phone to, pick it up. Like, I truly care. And everybody that I've ever worked with on these lines and things, they have been so compassionate and so caring. And, you know, we're all here because we care about, making somebody, better, as far as like letting them know that they're not alone and it's okay if they're not okay. Like, if they just need a vent, just trying to make them feel better. And even if you can't make them feel better, at least you can talk to them and listen to them and be there for them. And like you said, they're not alone at the end of the day.
Because everybody who works for 988, I mean, we care and you matter and what you're going through matters and we want to hear from you.
Yeah.
I feel like I could get, I'm like emotional talking about 988. It's just so important. And I don't know, it's like Suicide Prevention Month. It's only the third, and I feel like it's already rocking and rolling. There's so many
Mhm.
amazing events going on. Um, Shout out to our own social media if you want to follow us at VLink 211. The amazing Erin Sims, who's been on the podcast a couple of times, actually created a flyer that's got a link to a live calendar where we are updating events going on all around the state. And so if you have the link with the flyer, that's going to be consistently updated. And so we are putting all of the events that we are being made aware of, which is a lot. All around the state on that calendar. So please go check it out. And of course, you can always reach out to us if you'd like us to include your event. You can message us on our social media. You can contact us through our website, vialink.org, or you can reach out to me and Jesse directly by emailing realtalk@vialink.org. Real Talk is all one word. um, but yeah, yeah, I think it's really interesting to talk about, Jesse. I know we touched on it last episode too, that it's like suicide prevention and awareness for that is something that is celebratory because it's about like embracing everyone and being like, you are not alone. And I mean, when we're looking at data, at facts, it's like suicide theorists, it's impossible to get like an actual number, but most of
Right.
them believe that it's about like 86 to 90 something percent of people who are going to have some degree of a thought of suicide at some point in their life. And so it is normal. It is normal. This is something that
Yeah.
regularly occurs for most people. You are not wrong. You are not broken. You are not ill or sick. You have a brain that goes through stuff, and there is help and there is support for thoughts of suicide. And you can be a complete, thriving badass if your beautiful brain has thoughts of suicide in it. We've just got to make sure that we are ending the stigma, so not only can people reach out for help, but so that there's enough help givers out there as well.
Exactly. And I totally agree with that.
I feel like we have talked ourselves to a good concluding place. What do you think, Jesse?
I think so too. I think, we hit on the important things and just, with it being September, just people, if you're in Louisiana, look at that live calendar. You can, go to those events, and just, we're here for you. And if you need us, like Charlotte said, just reach out. We're always here.
Yes. All right, Jesse, shall we try our sign off?
We shall.
All right, I don't know why I was fancy about it. Because on this show, there are no
Well,
filters,
cheers.
no
No
fluff,
fluff, just real
just real
talk.
talk. Thank y'all, everybody.
Thank you.